recording has started. Okay, so before we begin, remember that there's no class this Friday because of Juneteenth, and your midterm, your first exam, is on the coming Monday, right? So on the 22nd. We will have a review on Thursday. So at the end of the class on Thursday, I'm just going to go over all the types of questions that you're going to get, just changing the numbers, etc., from the actual exam questions. And the exam is going to be online on a lockdown browser. It's open notes, but please be aware that we expect you to not cheat, right? So it's an honor system. So you're not supposed to contact each other. You're not supposed to look stuff up on ChatGPT or whatever. You can use your own notes, but you have to stay on the lockdown browser. If you require accommodation, um, uh, like and if you have talked to the Dart Center, we will give you extra time for the exam. All right, so let us begin. So today we're going to be talking about evolutionary computing, genetic algorithms, evolutionary algorithms. There's multiple different names for this particular topic, and every few years people say that like evolutionary computing is dead, right? But it's not really. It's one of those weird programming paradigms that keeps almost dying, with a small population surviving for some minimal subtask, and then suddenly it comes back very well suited for whatever the current big thing in computing is, which is very fitting for something called evolutionary computing, right? So in modern days, if you're all using like LLMs and transformers and deep learning models and whatnot, evolutionary computing is usually added in at the end or at the beginning, right? So when you are putting in textual prompts or whatever, the inputs, the successful inputs are curated through a process that is very similar to evolutionary computing. So what is evolutionary computing, right? So evolutionary computing is essentially built upon the theory of evolution, right? Darwin's theory of evolution. So you have some assumptions. So you assume that your problem, whatever problem you're trying to solve, has many different possible solutions that you can attempt, right? Not all of those solutions are good. Not all of those solutions are like actual solutions, but they're attempts at a solution, right? And in this huge population of solutions, um, you cut out any solution that doesn't fit your target function slowly, right? So you have some sort of evaluation function for checking all your possible solutions to the problem, and that evaluation function slowly weeds away less successful or less powerful solutions until only the strongest solutions are left. And then you cross over, like you combine those strong solutions in various different ways until you can come up with like the most optimal solution, right? So this is used in many different things, right? This is especially useful if you are doing parameter optimization, for example. So you are trying to figure out meta heuristics, which is a form of parameter optimization, particle swarm optimization, PSO, hardware evolution, and colony optimization. All of these have the same base understanding, which is you take a population of solutions, and then you have an evaluation function that figures out whether your solution is better or worse than any other solution to that problem. And then using that evaluation function, you cut down on possible solutions, right? So, and this is specifically modeled on natural selection, right? Because it says that over time, as you continuously apply this process of weeding away bad solutions, um, the remaining solutions are going to be overall, on average, have very high fitness, right? Their evaluation function results on the average are going to be much higher. And what is the advantage of this? Well, you can think of this when we talk about reinforcement learning, you will see that there is significant overlap in conceptually, but not in implementation details of reinforcement learning, where you reinforce good habits, essentially, where your agent, your intelligent agent that is solving the problem, you reward it when it does good things and you punish it when it does bad things. So over time, it learns to only do good things. Well, evolutionary computing does something similar, but using a more statistical approach to the solution, right? So you have many thousands and millions of intelligent agents, and you are very ruthless, right? You ruthlessly cut out any of those agents that are not up to your standard, and then the surviving agents, you pick the surviving agents and you mix and match their properties, and then you go again and you keep doing this, right? And that this is essentially the fundamental structure of evolutionary computing. um, some Another major point of evolutionary computing is that only the successful candidates contribute to solving the problem, right? Any So this is different from many other techniques that are used in AI, where um, candidate solutions, where filtered out candidate solutions are potential paths, right, that you can backtrack and search through again. In evolutionary computing, you don't learn anything from paths taken that don't go anywhere. Right? You only learn from your intelligent agent, all only those intelligent agents which are higher than whatever threshold you have for evaluation function eventually contribute to the problem that you're solving. So keep that in mind. This is a very subtle difference, but this difference becomes more and more pertinent based on the problem that you're trying to solve, which is why evolutionary algorithms got somewhat outdated recently, because you don't, for deep learning, um, if you are using evolutionary algorithms, genetic algorithms on deep learning inputs and deep learning outputs, then you want to know exactly why the poor solutions are performing poorly, right? But because of how random evolutionary computing is, your only information that succeeds comes from your surviving population. So what do we mean by all of these terms, right? So let's slowly get into all of these terms, right, and see examples of using evolutionary computing to solve a problem and so on and so forth, right? So let me show you an example, right? So evolutionary computing is also known as a branch of algorithms known as generate and test algorithms, right? So what these generate and test algorithms do, and you see this in deep learning too. There are entire subfields of deep learning which are less popular these days, which rely on generate and test, right? So you may have heard of GANs, generative adversarial networks, right? So those were very explicitly a type of generate and test algorithms, right? And they are entirely stochastic. The randomness is an inherent part of natural selection, and that is what makes it very strong, that you are not biased in any way. And the way evolutionary computing works is that your population gets mixed in various different ways, right? So there are various potential operations that you can do to create this diversity in your intelligent agents that are solving that in all the potential solutions that you have. So all the successful solutions that you get, you mix and match them using various different operations, and we are going to go into more detail about these operations. And those operations are the ones that give you enough diversity in exploring the solution space to give you unique possible results that you wouldn't see otherwise, right? And after you have done variation, we will see that you perform various different variation techniques to increase the solution space, and then you select. So you select a few good solutions out of them which reduces the diverse candidates, and that picks out only the top few candidates out of them. So this is essentially what evolutionary computing does, right? So you have a problem, you generate a million different solutions, you mix them up so that there is a lot of diversity in the type of solutions that you have, and then you perform selection by reducing that huge population into something smaller and fitter, essentially. So this example that has been playing in the background, this is kind of a reinforcement learning problem, but this has been implemented using genetic algorithm, right? So what this does is that you have a robot that is trying to learn how to walk, right? So you have a million different potential solutions, right, for learning how to walk, and all of those solutions are very slightly different from each other, right? One moves the leg like 5% more, one moves the leg 10% less, and so on and so forth, right? And based on that, your subsequent populations, whichever one of these successful robots or successful walkers that you have created moves the furthest or stays stable the furthest, whatever your fitness function is. You take some of those, you take the population out of those, and then you recreate the population using the ones that stuck around slightly longer, right? And you keep doing this, repeating this for generation after generation after generation, right? And well, while you are not guaranteed to reach the unique solution, you're almost guaranteed that whatever set of solutions that you end up fighting after a few hundred or after a few thousand generations, they're going to be better than whatever you started out. That is the big thing here, right? So let me pull up the website uh, that from where I took this. So this is the website, right? So Control Shift R F11, right? So you have a bunch of solutions and a bunch of controls, right? So you don't know what these controls mean right now, right? Like, so the mutation probability, the mutation amount, the number of champions that goes on in further directions, and so on and so forth. So um, the animation quality, etc. That stuff is fine. And finally, some noise, right? Noise. What do we mean by noise is the um, the randomness that you add to the solution, right? So you see that uh, at the start, you could see that like the things where the walkers were immediately falling over, right? But now as the generation is increasing, um, uh, the distance that people are walking are slowly improving, right? So at the zeroth generation, the longest distance people had walked was 206 units, right? And by the sixth generation, the longest distance people had walked was 309 generations, right? But then you see that it plateaued out, right? And then it took again another like 5 or 6 generations for it to find an improvement. Right. It took up to 14 generations after the sixth generation to for a meaningful improvement. And what this means is that the walkers are now slowly and steadily learning to walk. So if you keep doing this over and over and over again, and keep the variation, introduce new stuff in between, and so on and so forth, eventually you're going to come up with something really, really good. Right? This is what genetic algorithm is really good at, right? Where to take lots and lots of solutions and then unmotivated improvement, right? In this case, you are not specifically directing the solutions to any one end. This is completely unmotivated, right? So my plan was to have um, another in-class assignment using not this, but using this, right? Which is Control Shift R. So this is another similar thing like the genetic algorithm walkers. But what this one is that it creates a two-wheeled vehicle, right? And my in-class assignment would be that can you change mutation rate, mutation size, and the number of clones um, to get a robot um, over 200 meters. I think that was what I wanted you to figure out. But I tested it out, and it's very like obviously like genetic algorithms, it's very random. And sometimes even if you do this like 500 different times, you end up not getting a 200 meter or 150 meter or whatever. Like it gets completely stuck. So the best way I found out was having uh, a high mutation rate and and a large number of clones. But this performs better if you're doing this over and over again. But you can see how evolutionary computing works just from this, right? That there is all sorts of possible solutions, and you don't know which one is good or bad. But as long as you have a really good evolution and a really good function that is specifically designed to figure out, okay, is my solution good or bad? Then eventually you are going to come up with better solutions. So you can still try doing this. I mean, the website for doing this is going to be in the link. It's going to be in the slide itself. But Well, again, if you can come up with something better, if you can hit 200 meters, uh, then send me a screenshot and send me the parameters that you use, the number of generations, and so on, and I'll give you a few bonus points um, for your grade if you can come up with something that hits 200 meters. Right. So let's move on. Where's my screen? Okay.
Hey, Professor, do we have to just send you that in Teams or do we email it to you?
Email it to us because again, email is like slightly more reliable for this kind of purpose, right? So this is the website. So at the bottom you see rednote.org/ for the car example, it's car something. It's linked here. Let me put that on screen. It's genetic underscore cars two. So this is the website. Red Note, I'll paste it in chat just in case.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing the question right now. Yes, Eric, your notes would have to be physical notes. So print out, print out all the slides and that should be good enough, for example. Or if you have or if you have a book, that's also helpful. Right? So I put the link there. So yeah, you have to hit 200 meters, right? If you can hit 200 meters, don't change gravity and don't change flow. So don't change these two because otherwise it becomes very difficult to compare different results. You can change mutation rate, mutation size, and the number of clones. So what elite clones means is that how many of the really good solutions from your previous solutions are directly sent over to your next generation. So that's what elite clones are. So you can increase that, you can increase mutation rate, mutation size. And the question is, can you hit 200 meters? And if you can, like I said, send it to me and I'll give you 2 bonus points for your final grade. Okay, let me. Sorry, my throat is kind of done. So evolutionary algorithms, right? So let's understand the structure of an evolutionary algorithm, right? So I've been using these terms somewhat interchangeably. Um, I I grew up calling it genetic algorithms in school, but then when I went to college, everyone called it evolutionary computing. Then in some places, some books that I studied, they call it evolutionary algorithm. And well, there are subtle differences between the terms, but it's mostly Europe versus the US versus the UK, right? So it's essentially the same thing, but here in the US, most of the discussion you will find they call it evolutionary computing or evolutionary algorithms. But in Europe, they generally call it genetic algorithm. So if no matter which of these terms you hear, either you hear me use accidentally or you see online, they're all essentially the same thing. Oh, that reminds me. A really good book that I've linked here, neuroevolution.com. This book is available online for free. This is a really good book because it talks about how evolutionary computing or neuroevolution is used in actual practice these days, right? So how is modern large language models and modern deep learning models, how are they using evolutionary computing? So this is a really good book, and it's freely available. So if you're interested, you can look at it, right? So the main components of an evolutionary algorithm um, are is first the representation state, where you evaluate the population, where you create the population and then you evaluate it. Then you'd perform parent selection, which is which of the entire population, which of the ones do you think are going to survive, which of the ones should survive, and then you'd perform some mutation operators on those survivors, right? You combine those survivors in some ways to create new agents to be introduced into the population, right? And we're going to talk about some examples, and I'm going to show you some examples from the previous semester that students like you used evolutionary algorithm to solve problems, and then some behaviors and neighborhood search and global optimization. We're going to talk about that as well. Right? And at the end of the class, when we have time, we are going to start with the in-class assignment. The in-class assignment is going to open in like 5 minutes, but don't go and start it right now. Listen to the lecture, and I will give you some tips on what I want to see from you in the solution, right? For the in-class assignment. Right? So this is roughly how evolutionary algorithms are structured, right? The right part of it is the most important. So the movement from selecting parents from the population and then performing a mutation on those parents to generate offsprings and then adding those offsprings to the population. So this is the most vital part of an evolutionary algorithm, right? How exactly are you selecting your parents? Right? If you mess this up, if you mess up the parent selection process, right? Why is Why is my mouse like just like 3 inches above where I'm clicking? So weird. Okay, so this parent selection process is very critical because this is your evaluation function. So if you think back to your constraint satisfaction problem or to your game search problems, the big thing that you needed to do to optimize your solutions is have an evolution is have a fitness function, right? Is to have a function that goes through your solution and checks whether uh, if you move one step ahead, is the solution closer to being perfect or is it further away from being perfect? And that is what parent selection does, right? And if your parent selection process is good, then it automatically means that generally speaking, your mutation process is also going to be useful. Now, what mutation does is that it requires your parents to be, that is the population, the solutions to be formatted in such a way that you can take parts of different solutions and combine them together. Right? Now, this is not always possible. And so to do that requires some manipulation of your types of solutions, right? But it is still surprisingly powerful, and there are various different ways of a solution, of finding a solution, and then figuring out some way of applying a recombination operator or a mutation operator on top of it, right? So we will talk in detail of what a mutation operator or a crossover operator is, but understand that um, because of how evolutionary computing works, if you can represent your solution as a string, like as a binary string or as as genes, right? As a sequence of DNAs of like ATGC, then your this entire process of applying natural selection becomes easier, right? So uh, if you start out your problem by thinking of your problem in such a way that all possible solutions can be represented as a string of with the where different possible combinations of the string are different possible solutions, then you are already set to apply a genetic algorithm to the problem itself. And you also, of course, you need some sort of cutoff. So once you have hit created your offspring using your crossover operator or using your mutation operator, um, and then you need to have some sort of survivor selection method that culls any of your solutions that are poor, and then you add them back to the population. So what this means is that over this cycle, as it is going on and on and on, the deeper you are in this cycle, the better your population is going to get, right? So as this chain is progressing, any weak solution gets slowly culled out from the herd, right? It doesn't always mean that when you do crossover and mutation, that if the parents are performing at like a at a 90%, uh, it doesn't mean that all the offsprings that you have generated are going to be performing at greater than 90%. This is not true. Remember, this is definitely not true. Your offsprings can get worse. And in fact, you will find that in many cases, your offsprings do get worse. Right? That is an entirely possible thing. But over time, on average, the average offspring, because they are created from better parents, are going to be better than the average of your original population. So that is what makes evolutionary algorithms so much stronger, right? And this it's why it's why we use it too. And in some cases, you saw that in the car example that I just showed you in the website of the car example, is that in some cases you might even want to bypass the offspring completely. You send the parent directly to the population, that you have a parent selection, that you pick your parents, that these are like really good solutions, like 90% solutions. And then what you do is you send them directly back to the population and you cut off, you do a survivor selection on the population itself. So you cut off some portion of the population, say that it's bad, and then you add in more uh, examples of the parents. So your initial parents were P1 and P2, and now you suddenly, you bypass the offspring, and in your next generation, you have P1 prime and P2 prime, who are functionally the same as P1 and P2. But what this means is that there are the average level, the average success percentage, the average fitness of your population has gone up. So, so these are all possible approaches to take. Now, the basic pseudocode of an evolutionary process is very, very simple. It's the implementation that is very difficult, right? Like initializing your population with lots of different solutions is very simple. Um, Evaluating each candidate is not very simple, right? How are you evaluating these candidates? How are you checking that the solution that you have found to your problem is good or not, right? And in many cases, especially in the kind of work that I personally did, where I did a lot of agent-based modeling work, right? Not reinforcement learning, but agent-based modeling. And in agent-based modeling, I had tens of millions of agents with very, very different parameters, right? And each of those agents were working in a world with very set rules, right? And so to evaluate this, how do we evaluate this, right? So we have to figure out some way of checking that all our intelligent agents who are moving about in a world that you have created um, is what do you prefer, right? So do you prefer that your agents survive the longest? Do you prefer that your agents cover the most ground? Do you prefer that your agents hit fewest like hazards, right? So these are all possible evaluation targets, and they can all lead you to good results. And it's up to you to figure out which of them are good, right? Or do you have some metric within the candidate that does this for you? And every time you're doing this evaluation, you have to be careful that you don't hit good hard law, right? Always for all of these topics that we discuss, because all of them have separate metrics for evaluation, you have to always be careful that you don't get stuck on a good art. So you have to be careful about that. And then you perform the genetic algorithm, the evolutionary computing processes, right? You select some pairs of parents, you recombine, you mutate the offspring, then you evaluate the new offsprings that you have created, and then you select the individuals out of those offspring that you've created. You select some individuals to be added to the next generation, right? And you keep doing this until some termination condition of the evaluation of the whole algorithm has been reached. And this termination condition can be anything. This termination condition can be that the average fitness of your population has gone up. That is possibly one possible termination condition. Another very common termination condition is that how many generations have passed, right? And is the average fitness increasing? If after 2,500 generations, the average fitness is no longer increasing, you stop. Or it can be that even if the average fitness is improving over generations, you have a hard cutoff that after 3,000 generations, no matter what you do, no matter how much you're improving or deproving or whatever, 3,000 generations is a hard cutoff. You cut it off there, and whatever remaining population is there, that is your set of solutions, right? Or it can be that do one of your solutions hit a particular value, right? If in some way one of your individual solutions hits the target like value that you're looking for, then you stop, right? Like in the small task that I gave you earlier today, that is the termination condition, right? The termination condition that I gave you was can the car that you are generating through evolutionary algorithm in the website, can it hit 200 meters? That is your termination condition, right? It doesn't matter how many generations it takes. It doesn't matter what the average fitness of all your populations of cars are. But as long as any one car hits 200 meters, you stop because you have reached your goal. So again, termination. We will talk in detail. I mean, I will repeat what I just said when we talk about termination conditions. Is this? Yeah. So this is the model that we use for creating an evolutionary algorithm solution. So you create a population of solutions. Each of those individual solutions that you have must have a fitness function, and that fitness function is like we have discussed ad nauseum. That fitness function tells you like, okay, how close am I to the solution? Right. You pick a few variation operators, right? Crossover and mutation are the most common, but there are other rarer niche variation operators that are used in cases where your input data is not like very friendly to crossover and mutation, right? Say a good example of this is if your inputs are signals, right? Think of it this way: that you are training evolutionary algorithm on noise, right? On audio that is coming in, right? So where was this used? Well, this was used in astronomy, right? Where people are converting that light signals that were coming in, that were being tracked by telescopes, and those were stored as essentially brightness values, right? And people wanted to know that based on different brightness values and based on identifying what different astronomical or stellar objects they were, like somewhere different types of galaxies, somewhere different types of stars, and so on and so forth. So they wanted to figure out, okay, how do various different types of astronomical phenomena contribute to other specific astronomical phenomena, right? So uh, how often do different galaxies like merge together, and so on and so forth. So in those cases, because the incoming input that was coming in was stored essentially as brightness values as a continuous signal, um, it was very hard to do crossover and mutation for an evolutionary approach for that, right? So they transformed the data. They did some kind of Fourier transform, not the exact fast Fourier transform that you may have studied in your math classes, but a different type of transform, and then they applied some variation operators on that transform data, and they found they like their papers got good reviews, right? They found some interesting stuff. Um, and finally, after the variation operators have been applied, you need some kind of selection operator, right? And there are multiple types of selection operators. So there's survival of the fittest, that is only the fittest individuals are promoted to the next generation, or mating of the fittest, right? Not or and mating of the fittest. So uh, all the solutions, all of the problem that you find that have very high fitness values, you create new solutions by combining those together. So that's mating of the fittest, right? And this is kind of like a type of neo-Darwinism. So evolution, in this case, we assume, even though it's not always true in real life, is that evolution always is progressing towards better life forms. Like evolution is always going to lead you to better solutions. So this is the assumption that we have, right? And something you should be wary of is that this assumption, this is true on a macro level, but this is not always true on a micro level. So if you take evolutionary computing solution, then you cannot say that between generation 75 and between 79, uh, the generation 79 should perform better. The average solution, the average performer or the top performer in generation 79 is going to be better than the top performer in generation 75. Right? You cannot say that for guaranteed for evolutionary approaches. What you can say is that on average, the solutions, the average fitness for generation 75 is lower than the average fitness for generation 150. So that is essentially what genetic algorithm is going to tell, right? That on average, the probability of good performers is going to be much higher in the later generations versus the earlier generations. But there is no guarantee. So if you're looking for a deterministic solution, if you're looking for a deterministic approach, then evolutionary computing is going to like thwart you at every single possible approach. So that is the problem with the problem and strong part of evolutionary algorithm. Now, EA has essentially two forces that are fighting each other to improve your solution, right? So you are increasing the diversity of your population by the two operators, mutation and recombination. What this means is that you're seeing new types of solution. Right? Because of how you improve, because of improving diversity in the entire population space, you are seeing things that were not present in the initial population. Right? And that is the goal of evolutionary computing. Right? And the other push is that this entire diverse population set is too big, right? So you cull any low performers so that the remaining performers, the remaining agents of solution are overall higher uh, in fitness value, right? And in this case, diversity that we've been talking about is essentially how different are individual members of the population. Right? And this can be calculated in many different ways, right? So there are similarity measures essentially for calculating this, right? So if your solutions are graphs, for example, then you would use a graph similarity measure for this, right? If your solutions are genes, like the sequences of DNAs or essentially text, then you have various different kinds of text similarity measures that calculate, okay, how similar two different texts are each other with each other, right? And you cannot just check whether at every single position is there something different, right? If that is true, then you can just shift uh, an entire gene by one to the right, and you would have a completely different, like very high diversity. But that's not true. You need to check for uh, cooperations, cooperating sequences. That is how, generally speaking, you measure how diverse two different text strings are. Now, let's go back to this. The first role, the first component of evolutionary algorithm that we should look at is representation, right? So this is the first thing that we need to look at. So how do we create the population and how do we evaluate it? Right? So the job of representation is to uh, create candidate solutions that can be manipulated by our operators. Right. So essentially, there are two different terms that are in use here. So one is the phenotype, which is the original object in the original problem context, right? So uh, outside of the evolutionary algorithm approach, your actual potential solution, your intelligent agent, your set of intelligent agents, that is the phenotype. The genotype is how are you representing that original problem um, in evolutionary algorithm, right? And this means that there has to be two different types of mapping, right? So all your original objects in your initial solution has to be able to be mapped into a genotype, right? And this doesn't have to be one to one, right? One phenotype can represent multiple uh, can be represented by multiple genotypes. But the decoding process has to be one-to-one. Because if it is not one-to-one, then once genetic algorithm has been run and you have come up with the best genotype, then one genotype that you have found must be converted to only one phenotype. Right? Does that make sense? Because if you end up creating multiple different phenotypes from one genotype, then you don't know which of the phenotypes that you have created from that genotype is the one that performs the best, right? So that is something. These two terms you should be able to distinguish from each other, because in many cases when you're reading literature or when you're running some kind of libraries, that you have a genetic algorithm library that you're using to implement your solution, if you mix up phenotype and genotype, you are going to get into trouble. um, more into like genetic terms. Um, each of the genotypes are are contained chromosomes inside them, right? And each of those chromosomes contain genes, and those genes are in fixed positions called loci, and they all have a value called an allele, right? This is something that you may have studied in your high school biology classes. And so we reuse those terms, but you don't have to, right? You don't have to call them genes. You don't have to call them loci or loci, or you don't have to call them alleles. So that's I mean, I don't. I personally don't. I call them phenotypes and genotypes, and I call the chromosome or the digital DNA that you use, I call them embeddings. Right? And you will see that in many cases, real world papers, all of them call these things embeddings. That's what they call it. So the phenotype to genotype conversion is something that you should be very careful about. So your phenotype is all your possible solutions, right? They can be numbers, they can be signals, they can be sets, right? So remember when I was talking about like creating an agent-based model, in an agent-based model, an individual agent is represented by lots of parameters, right? Your agent can have parameters like in my case, I had various different types of parameters, uh, different types of jitter, movement. You and I don't remember those terms right now. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So your agent can have very very different types of properties within them. All you have to do is you have to figure out some way of encoding them into a space like this, into a genotype space like this, right? Which is a sequence of strings with a sequence of like uh, sets of values, right? It doesn't have to be binary. Like I said, it can be genes. So genes have 4 values. So it would be a quaternary. So it can be ATGC, or it can be essentially be an alphabet, right? It can essentially be like 26 characters, which would give you a very large genotype space. And you should have a function that not only does this encoding, but also does the decoding, right? So in the example, yeah, in these examples, right? Why do they keep reopening in different browsers? Right. So you can imagine that, yeah, the ones who survived into the next generation, uh, you represent these walkers, like you represent these walk. You have to find some way of representing these walkers that you can do mutation, recombination, and so on and so forth, right? You have to be able to convert these walkers that are in here into some way into this genotype space, into a set of values. Now, how do you do this, right? Well, the way you specifically do this for this one is that you combine them. You represent, say, for example, a set of values. Right. So your set of values would be that movement of legs, right? Your leg is moving right, your leg is moving left, and so on. Um, how far up are your legs moving? How far down is your left leg moving? Is my right arm moving up? Is my right arm moving back? Is my left arm moving back? Right. So again, this is not this is not simple, right? Uh, these are like complicated tasks. Like how do you represent this weird object into this genotype space so that you can implement a reinforcement learning strategy? It's not simple, right? And you have to be able to do this. Well, people do come up with these things, right? And people do find solutions. Um, and in order for your genetic algorithm to be successful, every single possible solution in the solution space must be able to be represented in a genotype space. The reverse doesn't have to be true, right? Um, your genotype, so the set of strings that you come up with, you might sometimes come up with solutions that are infeasible in the real world, right? When you are combining all these different genotypes together, like doing various different mutations and random changes and so on and so forth, you might come up with something that cannot be translated back into the real world as a possible solution. That's perfectly fine. But all the existing solutions have to have an encoding in the genotype space. So you have to be very careful that there are no edge cases, because genetic algorithms love finding edge cases, right? And they are going to get stuck on those edge cases. Like I have personally had to deal with this, and it is very annoying, right? That you let this algorithm run for 1 week in a high performance computing setup, and you find that from those 1 weeks, 6.5 days it has been stuck exploring one particular corner of the solution, of the population, that is essentially a quirk of how you did the representation, like a quirk of the numerical representation, and it's not really an actual solution. So you have wasted all your time. This is going to happen very often if you're doing genetic algorithms and you're not careful about the encoding. Now, the other big challenge is having the fitness function. Right? So the job of the fitness function is essentially to figure out how suited is the population to the current environment. Right? And without a good evaluation function, without a good fitness function, you cannot perform proper selection. Right? Uh, Yeah, the example here is an actual example from the real world. Like elephants have big ears because big ears cool better, right? And so these the this feature that came out of the population with having big ears, um, this feature is going to be rewarded. Right. It is going to be rewarded because you are more suited to large, like for large creatures in hotter environments by cooling them enough that they survive. Right. So your fitness function is going to see that any animal, like some large animals with big ears, survive longer. Right. And so they get rewarded, and so they survive. So it also has like evaluation function, fitness function, quality function, objective function. They're all the same thing, right? They're used in different places, right? In neural networks, for example, everyone calls it an objective function. Right? But essentially, a quality function and evaluation function, fitness function, objective function, they're all the same. You don't you can use them interchangeably. Nobody's going to mind, right? Everyone is going to know what you're talking about. But generally speaking, in evolutionary computing, people call it fitness because the word fitness more matches the original Darwinian natural selection process. Right? And what fitness function does is it gives a single rankable fitness value to each of the phenotypes, which we then use for the selection. Right? And your fitness function is better if it is able to distinguish between two very close solutions, right? So, and if solutions that are further away, um, they're obviously going to get different fitness functions. But solutions that are very close together, if your fitness function is good enough to separate them, like it is your fitness function is linearly separable, right? Think of your fitness function as a support vector machine, right? If it is a very strong support vector machine, then your fitness function is better, right? And another point is that generally speaking, we are maximizing the fitness function, but it doesn't matter. We are looking for extremes, right? Maximization, minimization, both are fine. There is also finding the origin, right? That means that your fitness function wants to make sure that you're hitting zeros. You're not highly negative, you're not highly positive, but you're using zeros. In those cases, your fitness function has to perform slightly different. Right? So one example of an evolutionary algorithm fitness function that performed poorly was okay, trying to find the. I opened the paper and I closed it and I can't find it again. Let me see. This is what happens when I accidentally close the browser tabs, and I'm unable to find the one that yeah. Okay, I think I found it. Right. So this is the thing, right? So people were using like this is slightly old, and they have reperformed this research many different times. So what this research was doing was using they're calling it an AI tool, but it was in effect uh, a neural network model, but with an evolutionary algorithm jammed on top of it, right? So what they were doing was they were taking in their population, so to speak, in this case, their population was uh, all sorts of possible chemicals, right? And like chemicals that could actually physically exist. That was their population. And their fitness function was checking whether the uh, the chemical that they were creating through this process uh, was uh, um, was close to good drugs, good beneficial drugs, right? So that was their fitness function. So what some scientists did to test it was they inverted the fitness function. So what this means is that instead of checking whether they were getting very close to uh, the good beneficial drugs, where they were checking how far can you create a chemical that can exist in the real world, but get as far as possible from danger, like from good, useful medicinal chemicals, right? So what the model ended up creating was lots and lots of various different types of chemical warfare agents, right? And various different chemicals and molecules that are even more toxic that we essentially did not know about. So just by inverting the fitness function, we managed to figure out millions and different types of extremely dangerous chemicals. Right. So this is why being very careful about your fitness function as AI scientists is very handy. Right. And this has not only happened here, it has happened in other places as well. So Microsoft, before modern large language models got very popular, um, essentially, in order to check whether their chatbot that they were about to release into the internet for people to talk with, they wanted to see if it was possible to subvert the chatbot, right? So they inverted its fitness function to go from maximum politeness to maximum impoliteness, right? So they created a chatbot that was maximally rude, essentially, right? So it created the most offensive chatbot possible, and they were successful, right? I think they even published a couple of papers on it, creating the maximally offensive chatbot. Right? So can be those if anyone's checking, is the uh, has the in-class assignment come up properly? I can't check from my screen here.
Yes, I see it come up, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, we will. You can. I will talk a little bit more about the in-class assignment in like 20 minutes. So you can start now, or you can continue listening to the lecture and then start later. Right? It's not a very complicated in-class assignment. So now that we've talked about the representation part of starting out an evolutionary algorithm, let's talk about the population, right? Which is quite critical. So before showing you, let me show you what some of your fellow students did last semester. Uh, so in last semester, your group project for this course, for this AI course, was essentially tackling a maze, right? They would have to fight a maze which had lots of hazards in it, right? The maze would fight back. So they had to solve a maze, avoid fire hazards, avoid confusion traps, avoid teleport traps and so on and so forth. So they would have to solve the maze. So what I expected your fellow students from last semester to do was use reinforcement learning, because that was what we talked about in class. But I also told them that they can use genetic algorithms. And I told them, if you do want to use genetic algorithms to solve a maze, this is how you do it. One group did try to use uh, genetic algorithms to solve the maze, and they came up with, and their solutions were very interesting. Right? So this is the maze, and you can see that this is a very old, early generation, right? And so all the possible solutions here are the agent is essentially moving randomly, right? So they are trying to go from this bottom spot, this green spot that I don't know if you can see. So they are trying to go from this bottom spot right here, and they're trying to hit uh, this top spot right here. Right? And these are all so the agent is essentially the population is all possible movements, right? So all the possible future. And you can see that these are rotating fire hazards, right? So you have to avoid these rotating fire hazards, because if you hit them, you get sent back. You have to avoid these confusion traps, because if you hit them, your controls get inverted. So you're trying to move up, you move down, you try to move right, you move left, and so on. And then similarly, these are teleport traps, right? So if you hit the purple teleport trap, you get teleported to the other. Sorry, if you hit the pink teleport trap, you get teleported to the other pink teleport trap. So this is the first generation, and you can see it's very poor. Right. It is exploring lots of things. It is exploring the bottom part too many times. It is constantly dying, and it is taking very long. Right. So this is like episode 2, and you can see that it is progressing much farther. It is no longer stuck at the bottom. Right. It's exploring the middle, like it is hitting the final solution much faster. And you can see that it has already gotten much better. Right. Like this is survival of the fittest, right? Only the really good solutions are surviving, but even now it is still not optimal, right? Even now it is still like spending too much time in this left corner, exploring locations that didn't need to be explored. And then finally even better, and this was the final solution, right? And you can see this final solution doesn't waste any time at all, and it avoids. You can see that it perfectly avoids the confusion trap. It perfectly avoids the fire. It waits for the fire, essentially. Their display is kind of bored, but it waits for the fire to go through. It avoids all the confusion traps, and it is essentially doesn't waste any time at all. And this evolutionary algorithm setup that they managed to create for this solution was equivalent to like the best solutions other students managed to come up with. Right? So other students had similar solutions. So this is another solution. Uh, yeah, this is another solution. Well, this student actually did it the other way around. So they started from the top, and then they headed to the bottom. Um, but their solution was effectively almost as good as the genetic algorithm solution. And this is using essentially a very good reinforcement learning algorithm. So this is a very strong reinforcement learning algorithm solution, but it only managed to reach close to the perfect genetic algorithm solution, right? And in their cases, the population was all the possible solutions, right? And then all possible solutions, they managed to combine it in various different ways to get the final solution. So you can understand that uh, you can apply genetic algorithms to various different kinds of problems, right? And it's very interesting to see how a genetic algorithm problem tackles and what kind of population survives and so on and so forth. Is your population plateauing and so on, right? So what is the role of the population, right? The role of this population is all the possible solutions that you can apply. And usually speaking, because of how selection processes work, that sometimes parents are directly pushed into the population back up again. So your population doesn't have to be perfectly unique, right? And you have to be careful. If you are not careful, if you are not monitoring the uniqueness of your population, then what happens is that in some edge cases, your entire population is going to be the same solution, right? And that solution is not optimal. That solution was it just managed to survive because it outcompeted its close by solutions, and then other solutions which may have been better just got killed off by randomness. So once you hit a critical uh, critical population factor of in a like critical percentage of the population, then essentially, even if you are unfit, then you grow to consume the entire population. So this happens a lot of times if you are not very careful. So you have to check for it, right? And something that people forget is that when we talk about evolutionary computing, right, we are not saying that individuals, like an individual solution, is evolving, right? We say that the entire average fitness of the population, like the entire population, is improving its fitness. So the population is evolving, right? The individuals are not evolving. And we see this with the two operators that we are going to talk about, that the selection operators act on population levels, right? That you select individual good solutions from the entire population, but the variation operators, which is where you take a solution and then you modify some part of the solution and you combine two different solutions together, those work on an individual level, right? So this is an intuition, right? So this is an intuition of how you are thinking about a genetic algorithm approach, that you are not looking for an individual solution uh, to evolve strong enough to take over, right? What you want is a very, very healthy population of solutions. Right? So that is the goal, and that is what evolutionary algorithms does. Right? It creates a very strong, highly fit population. Not that if you start off with multiple different, because in obviously in evolutionary algorithm approaches, you don't do it just once, right? You do this hundreds of times. So if you combine the population of all of them, you any individual population out of all of them may have one really good solution in them, right? But that doesn't matter, that like because it just randomly managed to produce one really good solution, it doesn't mean that the entire population has become very strong. The goal of evolutionary computing is to make sure that the entire population of solutions is high, right? The average fitness of the entire population is high. And we have talked about all of these before, so I'm not going to repeat them again. But in some of the evolutionary algorithmic approaches, we assert structure on the population, right? That we make sure that, and this is, if you have heard of Conway's Game of Life, which is a very popular example. So let me see if I can show you Conway's Game. Uh, This is called Conway's Game of Life, right? So uh, Conway's Game of Life is essentially uh, uh, if for a populated space, if each cell with one or no neighbor dies, each cell with four or more neighbor dies as by overpopulation, each cell with two or three neighbors succeed, right? And each cell with three neighbors becomes populated. This is essentially a cellular automaton, right? And so what you end up doing is, you create lots of different possible solutions, and you create lots of different values, and then you start off the population in some ways that, and then you try to see how far it goes, and you will see that it essentially forms bubbles, and those bubbles rhythmically expand. So this is the kind of structure that we sometimes add to a genetic algorithm approach. And because what those structures usually do is that it makes sure what I talked about previously, that one particular strong solution does not take over the entire evolutionary algorithm, like your entire population. And uh, essentially what happens is, in the real world, when you apply a revolutionary computing approach to a real world problem, you find lots of different edge cases like this. So what you want are tools, right? So the grid based approach is one such tool that essentially lets you tackle these problems. And the Conway's game of life has come to an end. Come up with something. So this is the kind of structure that you apply to a solution, to reduce problems in that solution. So population is, I hope it was understandable what I mean by a population. So let's talk about the selection mechanisms, right? Because that is also that is the like both the selection mechanism and the mutation operator. These are the big sources of stochasticity, right? Of randomness. And this is the randomness that makes evolutionary computing strong, right? So let's talk about selection mechanism. Now, the role of the selection mechanism is to select which individuals among your entire solution is going to become a parent, right? That they are going to combine to produce really good solutions, and which of them are going to survive into the next generation. Right? So that is the job of your selection mechanism. And a good selection mechanism, what the way you differentiate between good selection mechanisms and poor selection mechanisms is that overall, like on a long enough time scale, a good selection mechanism ensures that the average fitness of your population increases. Not a short time scale. In a short time scale, it can go up and down. But overall, on a long enough time scale, if your population's fitness is increasing, then you have a good selection mechanism, right? And the way you do this is stochastic, right? It has some probabilistic, like every single point has like a 0.1% chance of getting picked, right? And this process continues until you have hit like three parents or two parents or five parents or whatever. Right? And based on the fitness mechanism, high quality solutions have higher probability to get selected, but that doesn't mean low quality populations will never get selected. That is very critical. If your selection mechanism is so overtuned that only the best solutions get picked every single time, then you are never exploring the entire solution space wide enough, right? And you're not good. Your evolutionary approach is going to hit a dead end compared to one that has a smaller but still existence probability of picking a low quality solution. Right? Yes. Uh, Even like the way you check it is that, can your worst solution in your entire population space, can your worst solution still be picked to be selected to survive into the next generation? Right? If that is true, then your selection mechanism passes that test, essentially. Right? And this randomness, like I said, it helps you get stuck, like it helps you not get stuck in ruts, right? Like you'd avoid. Remember how in gradient descent, if you had higher temperatures, then you had a higher probability of taking a long step to and go out of a local optima, like a local minima that you are stuck in, right? And this selection mechanism does the same thing. It is essentially there's essentially a randomized hill climbing component of this that is exploring the neighborhood, but with a slight possibility of exploring even the furthest away parts of the neighborhood. Right? Because even if your lowest enough possible solution, like the worst possible solution in your population, your best possible solution, it is entirely possible, is very close to the lowest possible solution. Right? And well, you're not going to see it this class, but I had a graph, like I had a particular function. It's a very complicated function, but the image that it generated was very pretty. What it did was the worst solution, that is the minima, was statistically the closest point to the maxima. And that happens more often than you would think, right? Um, Another example of this was that when some scientists, if you, what is it called? I always forget. I keep calling it prions, but they're not prions. There's a chemical phenomena where I forget the term for it. There's a chemical phenomenon where certain chemicals, once you have created them in a lab setting, all other variations of that chemical degrades into that chemical. So like disappearing polymorphs. Yes, that's what it's called. So a disappearing polymorph is a local, is essentially a global minima for a class of chemicals. So, and if your chemical search space, so if you're applying a genetic algorithm approach to searching through various different chemicals to find some optimal solution, if you are hitting a disappearing polymorph, what is going to happen is that all other possible chemicals that you have created is going to be sucked into that. Right? That is what is called. Let me show it to you. It's called. Oops. Uh, Disappearing polymorph. Okay, this thing. This is essentially these are chemicals that you can design, that you can come up with, that are impossible to find any longer because they all degrade into some sort of local phenomenon. Right. So this is essentially a case of like a chemical case of poor selection, essentially. Now, the selection mechanism itself has various different types, right? And the one that most people use is called roulette wheel selection. What is roulette wheel selection? Well, let's say the fitness of one individual is 3, and another is 1, and another is 2, right? So you put this into a pie chart. So this is essentially your pie chart. So you add them up. So the probability of selecting A is now 50%. The probability of selecting B is now 17%, and the probability of selecting C is now 33%. So this is called roulette wheel selection. Right? Now there are various different ways, but the roulette wheel selection approach is good because it's so simple. Right. You can immediately see the roulette wheel selection, and you can judge how it's going to work and how your population is going to evolve. Now, there are more, like I said, there are more complicated selection mechanisms, and we will see a couple of them. But all of them, the big problem with them is that if your evolutionary computing approach is stuck somewhere, that your fitness is not improving, your overall population is just like bouncing around, on the same fitness values, then it's very hard for you to change those fitness mechanisms, in selection mechanisms in some ways, some of the more complicated selection mechanisms, and understand why your result is being affected. The advantage of roulette wheel selection is that it is so simple. Now, yeah, any selection mechanism can be used for both of them, right? Both for parent selection. So parent selection is which of these are going to be mutated and crossed over and create a new solution. Also for survivor selection, right? So once you have done your mutation and you have your new population, which of them do you pick to send into the new generation? And survivor selection is also called replacement. So it is also known as the replacement strategy. Generally speaking, in evolutionary computing approaches, your total population size is fixed, right? So you can have if you are doing perfect replacement, then your parents are replaced by your siblings, right? By you and your offsprings, not siblings, offsprings. Or it can be that if your offsprings have very poor fitness, then you're adding in duplicate copies of your parents, right? So that is often happens. Now the survivor selection process is also stochastic. So you have your parent, right? Your parents that you have picked by roulette wheel selection, I guess, or by directly picking the best possible fitness values. But generally, don't do that. If you directly pick, then you have a possibility of getting stuck with bad solutions. So you have picked your parents, you have picked your offsprings, and then you rank every value, right? Whether they are a parent or whether they are offspring, and then you only take the best 2 out of 3 or best 2 out of 4, right? And the other way is that you negatively weight old populations, right? So you take only those agents which are new, right? And you delete all your parents, or you have a possible probability that the older you are, the less likely are you to be selected for the new generation, even if your fitness is high, right? Even if you're an extremely fit like solution, if you have gone through like 10 generations, you are almost like 90%, 99% likely to get cut, right? So you use both of these in various different cases, right? In various different combinations and permutations, right? Like you can combine both of them. You combine fitness based, so where you rank your parents plus offspring and you take the top few, which is deterministic, but you also add in an age based criteria that out of the ones that you have picked that have the best fitness, you if you have an age greater than 5, then your chances of getting picked drop by 30%. Right? And so on and so forth. It can be a continuous function. It doesn't have to be these hard cutoffs, but it can be done this way. Right? Now, the next is variation operators. I think we're going to start with variation operators tomorrow, right? Because again, variation operators, mutation and crossover, that is critical, right? That and selection mechanisms are the most important parts of genetic algorithms. And I have seen in exams that is where most students make mistakes, right? Where with the variation operators. So again, we are going to start off by talking about the variation operators tomorrow, and we're going to make sure that you clearly understand what's going on, right, with the variation operators. Okay, so before finishing this class, let me pull up today's in-class assignment. So that was yesterday's constraint. Oh, sorry. I need to close this. I need to do this. I need to this constraint satisfaction. So the in class is this. Right. Yeah. So your in class assignment is this. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to apply the n queen problem solution that we talked about, right? So this is the solution that we talked about, and this is the one that I want you to apply, right? And we talked about this when we were talking about forward checking, right? When we were talking about like remaining states and forward checking. So that is essentially the approach uh, that I want you to take to solve this, right? So what does that mean? What it means is that the first thing you do is you place a value in the first available square, right? You have a set of values and you have a set of possible squares. So you always place the first possible value in your first available square, right? So over here, you place a 2, right? And then you place a 3 here and you place a 4 here. And then you see, okay, the 4 cannot be placed here. So you backtrack, right? You backtrack to 3, right? And you have placed 1, 2, and 3, and then you have backtracked, and you see that, okay, I cannot place 4 here, so I go to 3. So what can you place here, right? You can place 1, you can place 2. So you try to place 2, you cannot place 2 here, so you can place 1. Right. So you have filled out a row, and then you go back here, and then you see what values can I pick. I have placed 1, 2, 3. I can only place 4 here, right? And I can only place 1 here. So all you are doing, essentially what I want you to do is place values at the first opportunity that you have, right? And does that lead you to a solution? Are you able to formulate a solution and like formulate it very similar to the end queen problem? And are you able to like actually hit upon a solution there? Right? So that is what I want you to do. You have 30 minutes left. So I mean, class is essentially over, right? So we are going to continue with genetic algorithms tomorrow. So you have 30 minutes. This is not very, this is the world's easiest Sudoku, right? This is not very complicated. You are going to easily be able to finish this. So finish the solution, right? So that's what I usually tell people that just solve the Sudoku and then mentally think that how did I solve the Sudoku? Right? Like what techniques did I use to solve the Sudoku on my own? And can you formulate your mental model into a set of constraints? And can you apply those, like, can you write out those constraints? That's that's essentially the challenge. And you have, like I said, you have 30 more minutes to apply this. I'm going to have office hours tomorrow from 2 to 3. So if you have questions on anything, you can come and talk to me from tomorrow from 2 to 3. And we are going to continue with um, with evolutionary algorithms tomorrow. And I see that some of you have already sent me a couple of a potential solution. To this. I see that some of you have come up with 200 meters. Yeah, so my one still hasn't gotten to 200 meters yet, right? My top score is still 164 meters. So if you do manage to come up with a 200-meter solution, then yeah, for sure, send an email to me with like essentially a screenshot of this, right? That your top scores, your generations, your cars alive, your distance, mutation rate, mutation size. Just send me a screenshot with this, and yeah, I will give you 2 bonus points in your for your final grade. All right, that is it for today.
Professor, I have a quick question for you.
Yes, what's up?
With the class assignment for today, did you state that we have to fill row by row, or can we
No,
set
no,
a
that
different set of constraints?
yeah, no, that was just a suggestion that you use that row by row solution. That because that is something that from the n queens. I wanted you to try that n queen possible solution, that row by row solution, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, right? There is no like for this assignment, there is no correct answer. I mean, the Sudoku itself has a correct solution, so please put in the correct solution for the Sudoku itself. But overall, there is no correct solution. If you can come up with something to formulate this problem as a constraint satisfaction problem with a set of constraints that anybody can use to solve the problem, that is what I want.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
For the extra credit, send it by today, by midnight. I don't think it's very difficult. Like I personally tried and couldn't get a 200 meters. So yeah, if you get, it's essentially luck, right? It's very random. So if you luck into a 200-meter solution, well, you're getting 2 points for being very lucky, essentially.
So
That's pretty
Professor,
much it.
sorry, Is there a way you can write down all the rules and stuff like that? I think I kind of forgot all the stuff. You said not to use the
Oh,
gravity
just
and
yeah, just don't change floor and gravity.
floor and gravity. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
just don't change these two. Yeah, you can play around with these others. You can do whatever you want with these other values, because if you change floor and gravity, then it becomes difficult to compare your results with the other results, right? So that's why don't change floor and gravity, but you can do whatever you want with the other three factors. And besides, you can just fast forward if you want to avoid like waiting, right? And I think if you click on surprise, um, it doesn't bother with the visualization. Right. If you click on surprise, it doesn't bother with the visualization. It just does the whole thing very, very quickly. So I recommend just clicking on surprise every single time. So you don't have to wait to watch the visualization. If you hit a 200-meter, then you save the population, and then you restore the state population, and then you see see what it did. But otherwise, yeah, just click on surprise so that it can go a bunch of different ways. I don't think it's even like I said, I could never hit 200 meters. So, but if you can, best of luck. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I think there's a World Cup match going on, so I'm going to start watching that.